Whether it's on the floor of the United States Senate or during a television interview, when Mitch McConnell speaks, people listen. But the senator says it wasn't always that way. In fact, it wasn't that way during his early days in the Senate. Mitch McConnell is the author of a great new book. It is entitled The Long Game, a Memoir. It is a great read, and we're very pleased to welcome the Republican leader tonight from Newsmax, Washington. Mitch, it's so great to have you here on Newsmax Prime.
Yeah, great to be talking to you again, and thanks for your interest in the book and for reading it.
I'm intrigued, Mitch, because the title of your book, The Long Game, a Memoir. Most guys in politics wait until their days in Washington are over. Why did you decide to write the book right now?
Yeah, because I became the majority leader, which was my goal after I got to the Senate. And JD, it didn't happen overnight. You know, this certainly nothing about my career has been an overnight sensation. So I just stuck with it and kept plodding forward and hoping that someday I'd get a chance to be in a job that I thought really drew upon the best skills that I have. And that is the majority leader's job, where you get to set the agenda in the Senate. Unlike the House, where you served, you can't do things quickly in the Senate, and it takes a supermajority of 60 to do what you want to do. So it's hard to do things one party only and to do them quickly in the Senate. So it's an institution in itself that rewards patience. If you're too impatient, you're probably not going to be happy in the Senate.
Well, it is worth noting that the impatience has caused, shall we say, a difference of opinion within Republican ranks. Some folks, quite frankly, see you as an establishment insider, but the people on the left, like President Obama and Reid and the Hollywood liberals, don't see you that way at all. They've always spent a lot of dough trying to get you out of the Senate. And we think about what you were able to do with the Supreme Court nomination right now. And you've won accolades for that within the conservative community. But what do you attribute the disconnect to within the conservative movement about your actions in the Senate?
Well, I think a lot of conservatives are misleading people that listen to them into saying, into claiming that we can change things without a presidential signature. Yeah, you remember from your days in the Congress, the elementary facts are that a bill, in order to become law, has to pass the House, pass the Senate, and be signed by the president. And we're confronted with a president who doesn't have anywhere near the same views that we do about the way forward. So there's a limit to what you can do when you have to get a presidential signature. The Supreme Court, however, is different. I'm glad you brought that up. We don't have to ask his permission. We don't have to get him to sign anything. The Constitution gives us a totally separate role. He picks the nominee, but we decide whether to confirm them. And what I said, and since we had ball control here, unlike on every other piece of legislation where we don't in the end have ball control, he has the veto pen, we were not going to fill this vacancy in the middle of a presidential election year. We'd let the American people decide who they wanted to allow to make this appointment, because we know this will determine whether the court goes left or right for the next generation.
In reading your book, Mitch, a gentleman with whom I served in the House and you later served in the Senate from South Carolina, Jim DeMint, now the head of the Heritage Foundation, comes in for some criticism. What is your principal difficulty with Jim DeMint and his actions on Capitol Hill?
Yeah, well, he set up a group called the Senate Conservatives Fund, and unfortunately, the Senate Conservatives Fund kept helping to nominate people who couldn't win in November. So we lost 3 races in 2010 in Delaware, in Colorado, and in Nevada by nominating candidates who were simply unelectable in a general election. And then we did it again in Missouri and Indiana in 2012. And so I finally said enough. You know, the only way you get to make policy is to win elections.
Now, you write that there's almost a Jekyll and Hyde quality to Reid. Explain that to us.
Well, he's a nice guy personally, but when the Klieg lights go on, he says bombastic and inappropriate things. I'll give you an example. You'll remember just in the middle of the surge in Iraq, when we were finally getting the war in the right place, Reid declared the war was lost. He called President Bush a loser. I think the rhetoric is not the kind of rhetoric that I think makes sense for a leader of one of the parties in the Senate. I like a good old-fashioned political debate, but I like trying to be articulate about it and trying to be convincing about it and not just engage in bombast and name-calling.
And you talk about discussions with the president on the rare occasions when they take place. What is the Obama method to having a discussion about issues?
It's mostly that you should listen to him regale you with his brilliance. The president is a lecturer, and it's tiresome. I hear Democrats complain about it as well. To have the president go on and on and on. He's like, you remember in school, there was always some kid in class that thought he was the smartest one there and needed to make sure you knew it. It's sort of counterproductive. I think the president is a very, very liberal guy. You know, he's not Bill Clinton pivoting to the middle when you were there, you remember Bill Clinton pivoted the middle. He was reluctant, but he ended up signing welfare reform. We had balanced budgets 3 years in a row. Ronald Reagan did the same thing. He pivoted and was able to work with Tip O'Neill to raise the age for Social Security and also to do the last comprehensive tax reform. So what did Reagan and Clinton have in common? They dealt with the Congress they had, not the one they wished they had. This president, the first 2 years, got to do everything he wanted, control the Congress totally, $1 trillion stimulus, Obamacare, Dodd-Frank, the whole smear. When the American people revolted in 2010 and changed the House and made me the leader of a larger group in the Senate, I thought maybe President Obama would move to the middle. But alas, he did not. And he didn't after 2012, and he didn't after 2014. He's a very liberal guy. He's pursued his liberal agenda for the last 6 years after losing the Congress through the regulators, executive orders, regulations of all kinds coming out of virtually every agency in the federal government. I think we'll be able to say at the end of these 8 years that this is the most liberal president since Woodrow Wilson. And for those who are not steeped in American history, you know, Wilson was a genuine left-winger. He believed even the founding fathers made a lot of mistakes in the Constitution.
Mitch, you were on CNN saying that you feared that the upcoming election could look like the Goldwater situation back in 1964. Do you really believe Trump, as the Republican standard bearer, will take the GOP into a Goldwater-like situation this year?
Well, I think what you're referring to was my concern that the Goldwater position on the Civil Rights Bill in the 60s virtually eliminated the possibility of Republicans appealing to African-American voters, and that's persisted for a long time. Goldwater had many good qualities. I was a great admirer of his, but I think that decision was a defining moment in terms of the Republican Party and its ability to appeal to African-American voters. I don't want to see that happen to Hispanic Americans. As recently as 10 years ago, George W. Bush got 44% of the Hispanic vote. I worry about Donald Trump's rhetoric. I wish he would discontinue it. For example, the gratuitous attack the other day on Susana Martinez, the Republican governor of New Mexico, struck me as really quite odd because we know Donald's going to be the nominee now. I support him. He won it the old-fashioned way. He got more votes than anybody else. But this is the time to be bringing Republicans together and getting unified in order to go into the general election and defeat Hillary Clinton.
But again, your endorsement of Donald Trump is complete. You may have some differences with him, but you are going to work for victory for the Republican Party in all situations in November.
Absolutely. Look, I mean, here's the choice. Hillary Clinton's not very popular, and according to the polls, Donald Trump isn't very popular either. So you've got two candidates, neither of whom the public is in love with. So what is the election about? I think it's not about personality, it's about policy. Do the American people want 4 more years just like the last 8? America's been underperforming now for 8 long years. This is the worst recovery after a deep recession since World War II. Look at the job figures out just today that you and I are speaking. A puny 47,000 new jobs added in the last quarter. The growth rate in the last quarter was only 0.5%. We ought to be growing at about 3 to 4% annually. It's been the history in America. President Obama's not had one quarter, not one, of 3% growth rate. Record numbers of people on food stamps. Americans are struggling. That's why they're so angry. Now, you see that on the left with the Bernie Sanders brigades, and certainly that fed the rise of Donald Trump.
And as we look at what is ahead, it is often good to look at what has come before, and that is what you do in your new book, The Long Game, a memoir. I've just got to tell you again, Mitch, I very much enjoyed the book, and while we may not agree on every subject that comes down the pike, I think you give us some insights and some keen analysis in your book, and we sure thank you for your time tonight on Newsmax Prime.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed being with you, JD.